Yo, what's up everyone? It's Josh over here with the Manchise. We took a 1-week hiatus, man. I didn't put a video out for the last fight, Ortega versus Korean Zombie. I was just super busy last week, man, and so I apologize for that, but I'm going to be providing content every week going forward. Last week's card was great, man. Dude, what a performance from Brian Ortega. Dude looks like a killer. But enough about last week, man, because we have the most anticipated card of the year coming up Saturday night, UFC 254, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje. These guys are fighting for that lightweight world title, unifying the belts here. And I am super stoked. Huge Khabib fan, huge Justin Gaethje fan. Like, I just can't wait for this one. It's going to be... I'm just on the edge of my seat. So we're going to do what we always do, man. We're going to break down this card. We're going to get into some DFS analysis, some DraftKings. Might even touch on a little bit of FanDuel this time around. I mean, I've been ignoring FanDuel in some of the previous videos because of, I think, some of the nonsense. They don't allow you to swap, which sucks during like COVID, and we've talked about that before, but maybe we'll touch on a little bit of FanDuel for all my FanDuel players out there. So, with all of that being said, let's kick it off with the main event. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje. Khabib, obviously 28-0, man. Fighting out of Dagestan, Russia. Trains with AKA Javier Mendez. Going up against Justin Gaethje, 22-2, which is insane. He's on a nice little 4-fight win streak. Elevation Fight Team, Trevor Whitman, that's his boy. Those guys, not only is Trevor Whitman his head coach, but that's like his best friend. He's really his protege. And this is going to be great because this is kind of your classic grappler striker matchup. Outside of the fact that Justin Gaethje does have a crazy wrestling background, we haven't seen it yet in the UFC. He just hasn't really need to use it. I mean, the guy is just a savage, ridiculous power in his hands and some nice crisp boxing combos as well. So obviously Khabib, 28-0, has now had the title for a little while, has victories over guys like Edson Barboza, Michael Johnson, Ali Aquinta, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier. I mean, this guy's beaten the who's who in the lightweight division. And for Gaethje, man, ever since he lost that fight to Poirier about 2.5 years ago, he's just been on a tear. KO'd James Vick, KO'd Edson Barboza, KO'd Cowboy, KO'd Tony Ferguson, which was super impressive about 5 months ago. These guys are similar in size. Gaethje's about an inch taller, same amount of reach. Should be a good fight. The odds in this one don't surprise me, though. As you can see, Khabib is a pretty sizable favorite at minus 335. And this is the shocking thing to me about this fight. When I'm doing my research, oftentimes I come across some videos on YouTube where they're asking other UFC fighters who they think is going to win that matchup. And I couldn't believe how many UFC fighters were siding with Justin Gaethje. They think he's going to be able to prevent the takedowns and will have an advantage in striking and can be the first man to ever beat Khabib Nurmagomedov in the octagon. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I am in agreement with Vegas here. I like Khabib a lot in this fight. -3, what is he at? He's all the way minus 335 at this point. That's a little scary to me. Not a ton of money to be made there, but I think it's a safe bet, man. I honestly do. The thing is, we keep hearing about Justin Gaethje's wrestling background. I understand he's been wrestling his entire life, was a stud in All-State in high school, stud wrestler in college as well, but there's just levels to the game. It's not like Khabib hasn't been in the octagon before with other guys that have wrestling credentials like Ali Aquinta and even Michael Johnson. And I mean, if you go down the list of the guys that have fought Khabib, a lot of those guys have decent wrestling background. And none of those guys could prevent the takedown. And the thing is, with Justin Gaethje, it's not like this guy's got 100% takedown defense. I mean, he's got an 80% takedown defense. Now, I will say the thing that is working in Gaethje's favor is that when he has been taken down, he has been able to get back up. It's not like anyone's really been able to control him on the ground. The problem here, though, is Khabib is just absolutely relentless. This is a guy that he's going to continue to shoot in for those takedowns. It doesn't matter if you snuff out the first 10. He's going to go hard with an 11th. And eventually, when he gets you down, he has shown that he has no problem controlling his opponents once they are on the ground. And that's what scares me. Because if Gaethje can snuff a few early takedowns, if Gaethje can make his way back to his feet, I feel like it's only a matter of time before he's drug in those deep waters. And there isn't a man on the planet in the 155 division that can break free of Khabib's Dagestani handcuff and ground control. And it's only a matter of time before he chokes you out or just basically ground and pounds you. So I really like Khabib Nurmagomedov in this one. Let's talk about this fight from a DraftKings perspective. You know, Khabib is priced up at 9,200. And, you know, that's typically right about where he is in his price points, right? I'm just looking down the line. 9,300 Poirier, 8,400, which is crazy, against McGregor. 9,100 Iaquinta, 9,100 Barboza. And this is a guy that constantly scores over 100 points. He's only ever had 2 fights in his MMA career where he didn't cross that triple-digit threshold. He put up 96 against Dos Anjos and 94 against Healy. You know, this is a guy that's going to score probably 5 to 6. I mean, he had a fight against Abel Trujillo where he landed 21 takedowns. Like, this is a guy that you have to have in your lineups, man. I'm going to have tons of Khabib exposure this weekend. For Gaethje, this is the crazy thing, right? Because I just talked about how much I love Khabib in this matchup. For Gaethje, he's priced all the way down at 7K. And it's like DraftKings is just daring you to put him in your lineup. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to have a few lineups with Gaethje sprinkled in. It's hard not to when he's priced down at 7K, and this is a guy that finishes everybody. You know what I mean? He's always involved in exciting fights, right? The 2 losses on his record, Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier, he still landed over 100 significant strikes. So, I mean, this guy is an incredible fantasy performer. And I really think that he's going to get a decent amount of ownership because I don't really love a lot of the 7K options this weekend. I think a lot of people are going to throw Justin Gaethje in their lineup. So I'm going to be fading him for the most part this week. Now, I play in a bunch of tournaments, so I will have my fair share of exposure, but probably not as much as you would think I would have. And it's just because I'm so confident in Khabib Nurmagomedov. So we'll move on to the co-main event. And this should be a decent scrap here. You know, this card has had a lot of amendments made to it. But co-main event, former champion of the middleweight division, Robert Whittaker, taking on a fight against Jared Cannonier. Really an up-and-comer in the middleweight division. We'll start off with Robert Whittaker, who's 21-5 as a professional. And he fought Darren Till not too long ago, right? I mean, it's been about 3 months maybe. And that one went the distance, but Whittaker just looked like the better fighter in that one. He landed the more clean strikes. Before that, of course, he lost the belt to Israel Adesanya, was knocked out. But Whittaker, I mean, we've discussed Robert Whittaker on this show previously. I mean, this guy's fought the who's who in the middleweight division. He's got victories over Yoel Romero, Jacare. I mean, you name them, he's probably had success against them. For Jared Cannonier on the other side, 13-4, decent record as a professional. We've talked about Cannonier before as well. I mean, this is a guy that started off his career as a heavyweight, moved down to light heavyweight, and now he's fighting as a middleweight, that 185-pound division, which is pretty crazy. I think he's finally found a home here, though, and I mean, he's on a nice little 3-fight win streak as a middleweight. And it's all been finishes, right? He finished David Branch, he finished Anderson Silva, and he finished Jack Hermansson. So, and those guys are no slouches. So, Jared Cannonier, I mean, he's cut, he's got long arms, he throws heavy bombs. And believe it or not, I really like Cannonier in this fight. He is a very slight favorite. I think a lot of the MMA community, a lot of the guys that, you know, even on Tapology, or some of the guys that, you know, I like to listen to their opinions when I'm doing my research. You know, a lot of those guys are all over Whittaker this weekend, and the reason for that is because they just think Whittaker's the more well-rounded, more experienced fighter. He's been in there with hard-hitting savages, and he's been able to survive before. And if you look at Cannonier's record, man, he did go through a little rough patch there in the light heavyweight division, losing to Teixeira, Blachowicz, and Reyes. Well, now when you look at those losses, I mean, Reyes and Blachowicz just fought each other for the title. And Teixeira is just, you know, he's had title fights before. He's been one of the best light heavyweights for quite some time. So, you know, there's nothing. Cannonier shouldn't be frowned upon for taking L's in those fights. And you know, and it's not like he got destroyed in those fights. Reyes was really the only one that finished him. He was able to go to the distance against Blachowicz and Glover Teixeira, which is just super impressive, especially now that he's fighting as a 185-pound middleweight. That's absolutely insane. So here's the thing. When I look at this fight, Whittaker has shown now throughout his UFC career that he will engage in a brawl, and he's a little bit chinny. And when I say chinny, I don't mean it's like, you know, you just land a shot on his chin, he goes to sleep. Really what I mean is he'll put himself in vulnerable positions where he's not necessarily ducking his head in and out, and when he throws a jab or he throws a kick, he's susceptible to a big counter. And I think that's going to be problematic in this fight, right? It was problematic against Adesanya. It was problematic against Wonderboy Thompson. I know you got to go all the way back to like 2014. But it was even problematic in his fights against Yoel Romero, who landed some big shots. The problem with those bouts with Yoel Romero is Yoel Romero's never been a high output fighter, right? So, you know, he goes through these spurts of aggressiveness, landing a big shot, and then, you know, he's got to recharge the batteries, right? So he doesn't gas himself out. And that led to Whittaker being able to regain his composure and then ultimately outpointing Yoel Romero. And he won those fights. With Cannonier, I don't see that. Cannonier is going to be very technical here, and if he smells blood, he's going to go for it. If he lands a big shot on Whittaker, he's going to go for it, and I actually think Cannonier wins this fight and is able to finish Robert Whittaker. When it comes to DFS, man, this is your 8,200, 8,000 price point matchup on DraftKings. Well, that means you're probably going to get exposure to one of these guys. You know, this is a weird one for me because I just talked about how I like Cannonier a lot, and I want to get a ton of exposure to him. But when I'm making these lineups, for whatever reason, it's difficult for me to get a ton of Cannonier in my lineups. What ends up happening is, like, I have a couple lineups right now where I have Whittaker in my lineup, and I only have $100 remaining in salary. So I'm $100 short. I would love to swap him out and put in Cannonier, but I can't. So, you know, I'm really going to have to make some adjustments because right now I'm probably overinflated on Whittaker. I'm definitely going to have exposure to both fighters. I mean, this is a fight that you certainly want to target. You know, both these guys are great fantasy performers, and they're both reasonably priced because it's a close fight. But I want to have more exposure to Cannonier, a little bit less exposure to Whitaker. Right now, it's right around 50-50, maybe even a little bit more exposure to Whitaker. And I think, that's how the public's going to play this fight as well. I think you're going to see a lot of people that are like, former champion Whitaker, he's a dog here, he's an 8K option. I expect Whitaker to have a ton of exposure. I want to pivot away from that and get some Cannonier in my lineups. All right, so we'll move on to the next fight here on the main card, which is a heavyweight bout between Alexander Volkov and Walt Harris. Let's start off with Volkov, right? The 31-8 Russian veteran, 6'7", 81-inch reach, just massive fighter. Looks like Drago from Rocky. Volkov's 3-2 in his last 5 UFC fights. Notable victories over Stefan Struve, Fabricio Werdum, and Greg Hardy. His losses, Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis, other top 5 heavyweights. And that Derek Lewis fight, he was basically dominating the entire fight until the very end when he got caught by a massive overhand right. He's going to be facing off against Walt Harris here. He's coming off of a loss 5 months ago to Alistair Overeem, who just dropped him with a heavy shot and ground and pounded him out. I mean, that's the best way I could put it. But before that, man, Walt Harris had a nice little streak of victories. I don't know if it was the toughest competition that he was facing, right? So he knocked out Daniel Spitz. He had a split decision victory over Andrei Arlovsky. He knocked out Sergey Spivak, and then he also knocked out Alexei Olenek. That was probably the most impressive victory. Olenek is, 42, 44 years old. So, and that's he's one of those fighters where he's trying to take you to the ground and submit you. If he doesn't do that, he's not going to win too many striking matches with other heavyweights. He was able to do it against Werdum, but that's because Verdum's another jiu-jitsu guy. So I want to talk about this fight. Obviously the size advantage here goes to Volkov, but Walt Harris, I would argue, is the heavier puncher. He's definitely not the more technical striker. Volkov's a better boxer. But Walt Harris definitely has more power in his hands. Now, here's the thing with this fight. This is going to probably remain standing the entire time. I highly doubt we see any wrestling in this one. So it just comes down to who lands the cleaner shots, and I think Volkov is the more technical fighter. The other thing is, if you look at Walt Harris, he's 13-8 as a professional. Whenever he's fought like elite heavyweight competition, so Werdum, Overeem, you could even argue Shamil Abdurakhimov, Nikita Krylov, who's not even a heavyweight. He's never had success against those fighters. When you look at Walt Harris's resume, who is his best victory over? I guess it's Alexei Olenek. Spivak is not that great of a fighter. Arlovsky's toast. I love him, but he's cooked. Daniel Spitz, Chase Sherman. I mean, whenever he's been in the ring with a guy that is a relatively elite, close to top 5 fighter like Alexander Volkov, he's come up short, and I expect to see that here again. So I really like Volkov in this fight. I mean, I'm looking at the odds. Volkov's now minus 185. I love that. All day. I'll take Volkov in this fight. When it comes to DraftKings, man, Volkov is a guy that I am putting in a ton of my lineups. This week, if you look at the mid to high 8s, it's ugly, man. It's ugly. You have Lauren Murphy at 8,800 who averages 57 fantasy points. You have Casey Kenny, 8,700. He's a good fighter, but he averages 76 fantasy points. Not a guy that's going to get a ton of finishes. You have Alex Oliveira, 8,500, 63 fantasy points per fight. And then you got to go down to Struve, right? And so, which fighter, if you're going to have some exposure to somebody in that range, who are you paying up for? For me, it's Volkov all day. 8,600, averages 76 fantasy points per fight. It's a heavyweight fight. This guy's got a bunch of finishes. And heavyweight fights are more likely to end in a finish. So I really love Volkov here at 8,600. I'm going to have a lot of exposure. Walt Harris priced down at 7,600. Well, you know, this is a guy that will end up in the optimal if he knocks out Volkov early. So you have to have ownership of him. So, you know, I'm certainly going to have a few lineups with Walt Harris. I'll certainly have much more Volkov than Harris, but you would be a fool to fade a guy like Walt Harris 100% just because he can knock out anybody at any point with an overhand right, a straight left. He has that level of power. And on a card where, like I had mentioned earlier, there's not a ton of great 7K options, you know, you need to look for guys that could potentially pull out a finish and score you 100 fantasy points. And Walt Harris is going to be that guy this weekend. He's your lottery ticket. He's a guy that's going to really make or break a lot of lineups, right? Because I expect him to either just get completely destroyed in a striking match with Volkov and probably not put up too many points, or maybe he lands a big shot and he drops 100-point slate-breaking performance. So, you know, definitely get this is a fight you want to target. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which this is the most interesting fight on the main card to me. Somehow Phil Hawes versus Jacob Malkoun has made it here to the main card. I think there's other fights on this card that are much more worthy, but you know, maybe this is a spot where the UFC wants to prop up Phil Hawes, or maybe they want to prop up Jacob Malkoun. I mean, the guy does train with Robert Whittaker. We'll start off with Phil Hawes, who's 8-2, and he's on a nice little 4-fight win streak where he has victories in Brave, Bellator, and Dana White's Contender Series. You know, and this guy is a Contender Series veteran. This is a guy that fought Julian Marquez a few years ago on the Contender Series, and he came out looking super strong. Gas tank just emptied, and Marquez landed a vicious head kick, knocked Hawes out. But you know, Hawes is a finisher, man. This guy is just chiseled, throws with some crazy power. He's pretty athletic. You know, and I'm just looking at his record right now. 8-2, and almost all of his victories have come by finish, which is what you want to see. For Jacob Malkoun, 4-0, he's fought in some regional scenes over in the, you know, New Zealand, Australia area. So, you know, this is a guy that, and if you look, he hasn't fought tough competition. Sebastian Temesi, 3-1. Christoph Van Dyke, 8-4. Ryan Haketa, 5-4. Cam Roston, 1-0. So Hawes here is going to be a huge step up in competition for him. Now, Jacob Malkoun is a guy that I had to do some research on because, in all honesty, I hadn't heard of him up until this fight card was announced. Now, watching Malkoun, he's a well-rounded fighter. He's got decent striking. There was nothing that jumped off the screen for me. You know, it wasn't like, oh, this guy lands heavy shots. But his boxing was pretty technical, man. Like, it wasn't like he was trying to land like these haymakers and put his opponent out. It was just landing strong jabs and some decent combinations, which is good. You want to see that. Now, the thing is with this fight, this is a big step up in competition, and Hawes is a guy that can knock you out. Now, it's tough for me to say that I would lean one way or the other betting this fight because Hawes is minus 255 at this point. And, you know, they're both making their UFC debut here, and Malkoun is just such an unknown. But I certainly think I lean Hawes in this fight. He's just fought the tougher competition, and he's been on fought in tougher promotions, and he also looks like the more powerful striker. Now, when it comes to DraftKings, it's hard for me to get a ton of Hawes because he's priced all the way up at 9,100, and though I think he's a very good pivot play this week because a lot of people are going to pay up for Khabib at 9,200. I think Da Un Jung will be pretty popular as well. Phil Hall's here is a good pivot play because he is a guy that can secure a finish. I will have a little bit of exposure to him, but not too much. And for Malkoun, who's priced all the way down at 7,100, he's actually one of the better low 7K options this week. And the reason for that is because Halls does have a suspect gas tank, and it looks like Malkoun's a pretty smart technical striker. So for some reason, Halls decides to empty it all in round one and isn't able to get Malkoun out of there, which Malkoun hasn't been finished yet in his professional MMA career, then you got to give the edge to Malkoun, right? And like I've talked about this in DFS, breaking down these videos now for the past few months, where there's fighters out there that are going to be high priced, that your Alonzo Menafields, your Abdul Razak Al Hassan, your heavy hitters that have a ton of finishes on their record, but also may have a suspect gas tank. And if they're fighting a durable opponent that can survive, then the advantage swings in their favor massively. And that's what you could see happen here. So I will have some Malkoun exposure. I'm going to sprinkle him into some of my tournament lineups, and gonna hope for the best at 7,100. All right, so we're going to move on to the next fight on the main card here. This is a fight taking place in the women's flyweight division. Fight between Lauren Murphy and Lilia Shakirova. I believe that's how you pronounce it. She's from Uzbekistan. So we'll start off with the UFC veteran here, Lauren Murphy, 13-4. Most recently had a victory against Roxanne Modafferi, split decision victory against Andrea KGB Lee, knocked out Mara Barella. She's been on a nice little tear here, 4-1 in her 5 most recent fights. Only loss coming to Sarge Eubanks. For Lilia Shakirova, man, it's a tough one to pronounce. She's fought in some weird, sketchy organizations out in Asia. I mean, I don't know else how to put it. 8-1 as a professional, though, and she actually does have a few finishes to her name, which is pretty impressive. I was able to dig up some things. She was a former champion for a promotion called GFC, which I am not too familiar with. Now, the woman that she fought, that was her most recent fight when she won the belt there, had a record of 1-1. So, I mean, and if you just look down the list, a lot of these girls that were her opponents don't have a ton of experience. 1-1, 2-1, 5-0, 4-4, 10-4, 6-0, 0-0, 1-4, 0-0. So, yeah, not much more to say about that. Also, she's taking this fight on short notice. Lauren Murphy was, I believe, originally scheduled to fight Cynthia Calvillo. That fell through. Lauren Murphy is probably going to have a little bit of a size advantage. I think she's an inch taller. She's also probably the thicker fighter of the two. With that being said, Lilia, she, based on what I saw, and again, it's tough to gauge because I was not familiar with who her opponents were, but her striking was actually pretty decent. I don't think she's going to come out here and knock out Lauren Murphy, but, it could happen. So for me, it makes sense. Lauren Murphy minus 220. Taking on an opponent that's making a short notice fight and isn't too notable. It's not like she's dominant in any one area either, right? Like sometimes you'll see these females that are, they're amazing at judo, or they're an Olympian here, they're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, or they have a professional boxing background. We're not getting that from Lilia Shakirova, so it's hard for me to not side with the more experienced fighter in Lauren Murphy. And when it comes to DraftKings, this is a fight that I am just totally avoiding. Maybe I'm stupid for that, but Lauren Murphy at 8,800, just not someone I want to have too much exposure to. She doesn't have a ton of finishes to her name, right? Like, her last finish came against Romero Barella. It took place in the 3rd round. She only landed 24 significant strikes before she finished her 70 fantasy points. You got to go all the way back to 2016 when she had a victory over Fasholes. That was a TKO victory, and she put up 104 points. But for the most part, you're going to get 30 points in a loss from Murphy, 70-ish points in a victory, which at 8,800, I can't see myself having a ton of Lauren Murphy. For Shakarova, priced down at 7,400. I mean, again, I just don't expect to finish in this fight. I don't expect to finish in this fight at all. Let me just pull up her resume here one more time. She's never finished someone with a submission. She's got 2 finishes out of her 8 victories. And if you look at Lauren Murphy, she's never been finished by strikes. She's never been finished in general. So she's super tough. You can't expect a finish here. Therefore, you have to stay away from Lilia Shakarova. All right, so we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which is a rematch that I have talked about on here probably like 3 or 4 times because it continues to be scheduled and it continues to fall apart. It's the fight between Magomed Ankalaev and Ion Cutelaba. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this fight. There's 2 reasons for it. One, because I've already broken it down so many times before, and I don't think anything's changed. And 2, because the fight already occurred, right? This is a rematch. This is the 2nd time these guys are facing off. To me, Ankalaev still has to be the big favorite here. He's the better striker. He's the more technical striker. He's also got an advantage if it gets into a grappling clinch type of fight. And this is a fight that you want to target for DFS. So we'll talk a little bit more about it when it comes to DFS. But just straight up, if you're betting this fight, I really like Ankalaev in this rematch. They tried to say there was controversy in the first fight. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Ankalaev was picking Cutelaba apart. He may not have been as hurt as he appeared, but it was only a matter of time before Ankalaev would have disposed of him in that fight. So Ankalaev in the odds, he is, boom, boom. Let's open that up. He's minus 320. It makes sense to me, man. Makes sense to me. I think he's one of the best value plays when it comes to DraftKings as well. He's minus 320. He's at 8,900. His price point, which is crazy because Joel Alvarez is minus 160 right now, and he's priced at 9K. So, yeah, you can. I think I'm going to get a lot of Ankalaev exposures. That's just what it comes down to. This is a fight that I want to target. Both these guys are heavy hitters. Cutelaba's been in there with some savages, man. This is a guy that fought Glover Teixeira. He knocked out Khalil Roundtree viciously. He knocked out Antigulov. Knocked out Luis Henrique da Silva. So, you want to have exposure to this fight because these guys both can finish their opponents. 3 of the most 4 recent UFC fights that Ankalaev has been in, he's gotten knockout victories. So I'm going to have a ton of Ankalaev at 8,900. I'll probably have a little bit of exposure to Cutelaba at 7,300. As I mentioned, there's not a ton of great 7K options this week. If I had to rank them, I would probably say Gaethje 1, maybe Malkoun 2, Cutelaba 3 for fighters that are in the low 7s. So yeah, if you're playing tournaments, you can get a little bit of Cutelaba, but for the most part, I will be rolling with Magomed Ankalaev. Let's move on to the next fight, man. Our featured prelim, which is a fight taking place in the heavyweight division between Stefan Struve and Tai Tuivasa. Stefan, the sky scraper Struve, back in the octagon here. I'm a little bit surprised because I know he was on the verge of retiring, and he's 1-4 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. Only victory coming over Marcos Rogerio de Lima It was an arm triangle choke, but I mean, this guy was finished by Ben Rothwell, lost to Marcin Tybura and Andrei Arlovsky, and was also finished by Alexander Volkov. So, now Struve's like 6'11", 84-inch reach. He's the biggest and tallest fighter in the UFC, but the thing with him is he's not an athletic fighter. Like, just his movements, and he's susceptible to getting knocked out. I like him more on the mat, which is crazy because he's not a great grappler either. But his long arms do allow him to lock in some chokes. And that's where I think he's most dangerous. So he's going up against Bam Bam Tai Tuivasa, who at one point was kind of like a blue chip prospect in the heavyweight division. He's now been on a losing skid here, where he lost to Junior Dos Santos, Blagoy Ivanov, and was just subbed by Sergey Spivak, which was crazy to me. I didn't see that coming. His first couple fights in the UFC, right? Victories over Andrei Arlovsky, Cyril Asker, and just ridiculous athleticism for a big boy, and a guy that people thought could be like the next Mark Hunt because he also throws heavy bombs, but it just hasn't really come together for Tuivasa as of late. And Tuivasa is going to be faced with the same challenge that a lot of the other heavyweights are faced with when fighting Stefan Struve, and that's getting on the inside because of that giant size and reach disadvantage. With that being said, Struve doesn't really control the distance great anyway. I think he's a sloppy fighter, and I just don't like guys that are already contemplating retirement. I like Tai Tuivasa to get back on track here, and though he is opened up as a slight dog, it's basically a pick 'em at this point. They're both minus 110, so I'll be all over Tai Tuivasa in this fight. And same thing when it comes to DraftKings. I don't think I'm going to get to any Stefan Struve. It's just not a guy that I'm too interested in paying $8,300 for. I'd much rather pay $8,200 for Cannonier. But Tai Tuivasa, I'll have a fair share of at $7,900. And hopefully we can see the Tai Tuivasa that knocked out Rashad Coulter with that flying knee early in round one, and he can put up 100 points. But this is a fight where I think if anybody's going down and getting finished in this one, it's going to be Stefan Struve getting knocked out by Tai Tuivasa. Those are my thoughts on it. So this is a fight I certainly want to target, and I am certainly going to have a fair share of Tuivasa in my lineup. So we'll move on to the next fight here, which is probably the fight on the undercard that I'm looking forward to most. It's a fight taking place in the bantamweight division between Casey Kenny and Nathaniel Wood. Both these young guys are top prospects in the bantamweight division, in my opinion. And they just match up so well. They're basically the same size, same reach. They're both really good strikers. They're high volume guys, and they both have good grappling skills as well. They're both 4-1 in their most 5 recent UFC fights. We'll start off with Casey Kenny because this is a super quick turnaround for him. He just fought a couple weeks ago when he beat Haile Alatang, and he just destroyed him with body shots. Absolutely, just over and over again, that kick to the body, kick to the liver, and he was out jabbing him as well. He's got notable victories over Luis Smolka, Manny Bermudez, Ray Borg. Got to sprinkle in a loss to Merab Balashivli in there where he just couldn't really prevent the takedowns. For Nathaniel Wood, this guy's coming off of a victory against John Castaneda. It was not really a close match, though. He pretty much handled his own there. Had a submission victory against Jose Alberto Quinones. Submission victory against Andre Ewell. Submission victory against Johnny Eduardo. So we see what Nathaniel Wood likes to do. He likes to strike, set you up for a takedown, then once you're on the mat, pull a Darce or a rear naked choke. He's really good with those. So I think Casey Kenny is the better fighter, though. I'll be honest with you. I think he's going to have a striking advantage in this fight. And Vegas agrees with me here because If you look at the odds, he is minus 175. Nathaniel Wood is plus 155. I think Kenny has also faced the tougher competition, something that we want to take into account. So I like Casey Kenny at minus 175. Now, when it comes to DraftKings, it's a different story. And it's a different story because I am not paying up $8,700 for Casey Kenny. This is a guy who, he's not going to finish people, right? These bantamweights, it's just not as likely. You have to go back to, he did sub Smolka. He was a huge favorite in that fight. But for the most part, that's the only finish that he has in his UFC career. Nathaniel Wood, priced down at $7,500, is an underdog here. And he is a guy that has pulled out a bunch of subs. 3 of his 5 UFC fights that he's been in, he's been able to finish via submission. And really, the only blemish on his record was when he was knocked out by Dodson. Because even in his fight against Castaneda, like I said, he was in cruise control the entire time. He landed 131 significant strikes. So I love Nathaniel Wood at 7,500. He is probably the best mid-priced, mid-7K option. It's either got to be him or Rakhmonov, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. So I'm going to have a ton of exposure to Nathaniel Wood. We'll move on to the next fight on the prelims, which is our boy Shavkat Rakhmonov, who I was just talking about. He'll be taking on Alex Oliveira. This fight's taking place in the welterweight division. And long-awaited debut here for Rakhmonov. This is a guy that's been scheduled for some other fights in the UFC, and they just haven't materialized. But he's 12-0 as a professional. He's a former M1 champion and 12 finishes, most of them from striking, but he does have some submission victories as well. And this is a guy that's coming into this fight as a big prospect here, man. This is going to be a little bit of a step up in competition. M1's a great promotion, but they're not doing him any favors by throwing him in there with Alex Oliveira, who's fought just about everyone, right? Alex, the Brazilian cowboy Oliveira, 22-8. He is only 2-3 in his 5 most recent fights, but he's on a nice 2-fight win streak with victories over Max Griffin and Peter Sabota. But, Alex Oliveira's been in the ring with a bunch of savages, man. This guy's fought Mike Perry. He's fought Gunnar Nelson. He's fought Carlos Condit. He's fought Yancy Medeiros, Tim Means, Cowboy, Gilbert Burns. You name somebody in that division, welterweight division, and Oliveira's been in the ring with them. So he's never a guy that, to me, he's like a top 10 guy. Like that's his potential. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy that's going to get the belt, especially not at this point in his career. But he's a good guy to gauge. He's basically a gatekeeper at this point, right? Like if you have a top prospect, a guy like Mike Perry at the time when he fought Alex Oliveira, you throw him in the ring, and if he passes that litmus test, and hey, maybe we got something in this guy. So I like what the UFC did with their matchmaking here. They could have given Rakhmonov kind of a softball, but instead they're going to put him on a main card here, a main pay-per-view card, and throw him a pretty tough opponent in Alex Oliveira and see what he can do. And if he beats Oliveira, then you're only going to be on your way up from there. Whereas if you throw him toss him a softball opponent, then it's like, all right, well, when do we finally make that jump? And I think Rakhmonov's ready for it, man. I've been able to watch some of his fights. His striking's super clean. It's more technical, and it's cleaner than Oliveira's. Oliveira does well, though, in those weird style fights where just shit goes and hits the fan. That's where Oliveira really excels. He's a little bit more wild, and sometimes he struggles with his gas tank. And in his fight against Sabota, that was one of the things that I was concerned about, but he really looked good. The thing is, Sabota is not nearly as dangerous as Rakhmonov is, and I think Rakhmonov is able to finish Oliveira, so I like him as the dog here, minus 120. He opened up as a minus... Whoa. He's no longer a dog. So he opened up plus 140. He's now minus 120. It makes total sense. You got to follow the public on this one and bet Rakhmonov. When it comes to DraftKings, I just mentioned Nathaniel Wood at 7,500. I'm going to have a ton of exposure to. Rakhmonov at 7,700. I'm going to have a ton of exposure to as well. I'm going to have so much ownership of those guys. Hopefully they don't let me down. This guy's a finishing machine, 100% finish rate, and a guy that I'm circling here, and I'm going to have a ton of exposure to. I'm not going to have too much Oliveira. 8,500 just doesn't make sense to me. I'd rather pay 8,600 for Volkov, or I'd rather save myself a little bit of money and go with a guy like Cannonier or Whitaker. So Oliveira's just not known for, if you look at his most recent fights, 1, 2, 3, 4, his 4 most recent fights have gone the distance. The one before that, he lost to Gunnar Nelson. He was subbed. So you got to go back 6 fights ago where he finished somebody, right? He finished Carlos Pedersoli. So, at 8,500, not a fan of him. I will probably be fading him. So we'll move on to the next fight on the prelims here, which is a fight taking place in the light heavyweight division between Da Un Jung and Sam Alvey. Not much to talk about here. I mean, Sam Alvey's a veteran, definitely the definition of a gatekeeper at this point in his career. Probably one of the nicest guys in the UFC as well. I actually had a chance to meet him. 33-14 professional record, so dude's grizzled veteran, but he's on a 4-fight losing streak. He's lost to Ryan Spann, Klidson Abreu, Jimmy Crute, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, so Lil Nog. But here's the thing. Sam Alvey's a tough guy, man. He's a tough guy, and he throws hard as well. But, at this point in his career, he's 34 years old. He's been engaged in a ton of wars. I think he's on his way out. And for Da Un Jung, it's the complete opposite, because he is 2-0 in the UFC. He finished Khadis Ibragimov. He finished Mike Rodriguez. He's got a size advantage here. He's got a reach advantage here. And he looks super impressive fighting out of South Korea. And he is one of the biggest favorites on the card at minus 345. That makes total sense to me. I really love him here. I think he's going to be able to get Alvey out of the octagon pretty quick. Now, he's priced all the way up at 9,400, which is currently the most priciest fighter on the card. I actually like him this week, even at that 9,400 price point. I think he's a lock to probably put up 100 points. And I think with so many people paying up for Khabib, I think he's a guy that's going to be under-owned and is going to fly under the radar. So you might turn out having Da Un Jung in your optimal. I'm definitely going to have some exposure to him. I will not have any exposure to Sam Alvey at 6,800. I mean, really, how could you? You got to go all the way back to his victory against Marcin Prachnio. He was able to knock him out in the first round in 2018. That's really the last time that he's had any fantasy relevance. This is a guy that just doesn't, even in victories, score a lot of fantasy points because he's not a high-volume guy. So, 6,800 price point makes sense to me, and I will have no exposure to him. So we'll move on to the next prelim here, which is a fight taking place in the flyweight division, female flyweight division, between Liana Jojua and Miranda Maverick, who finally gets to make her UFC debut here. She was scheduled for a couple fights before things didn't materialize. A top prospect coming out of Invicta, a girl that's on a 5-fight win streak here with a ton of submissions. She's young, she's 23 years old, so she's only going to get better. And she's someone that a lot of people are high on. So she's going to be taking on Liana Jojua, who's been pretty active during this quarantine. This will be her 3rd fight now, really, in the past year. In her UFC debut, she got absolutely manhandled by Sarah Morris. And just 3 months ago, she fought Diana Belbitsa and was able to armbar her. And that's Jojua's game. That's the one thing she's bringing to the octagon. She's not a good grappler. She's not a good striker. But she's got that one move. She has that one armbar from the back. If she catches you in it, she's going to get you to tap. And that's what she did against Belbitsa. Belbitsa was really having great success in that fight, in the clinch, even striking. And I don't know why she decided to try to take Jojua down. And it was probably tempting because Jojua's takedown defense stinks. And as soon as it got to the ground, Jojua cinched up that arm. Tap, 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 good night. Belbitsa was cooked. So Could it happen here, especially against a young 23-year-old opponent in Miranda Maverick? Maybe. Because Maverick's going to want to take her to the ground too. But Maverick's got really legit submission skills, and Belbita doesn't. So I like Maverick here, obviously. Again, she's a big favorite. She's minus 440. She's the biggest favorite on the card. I get it. I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to her in DraftKings. I might have one lineup out there with Joe Jewett in it, right? Just because, like, I just feel like that's the type of fight where everyone's going to sleep on Joe Jewett. She locks in that armbar submission, and boom, voila, you have someone that just now broke the slate. So I'll have one lineup with Joe Jewett. Not too much of Miranda Maverick. She is priced at $9,300. It's just hard. I'd rather pay for Da Eun Jung at $9,400. That's just what it comes down to, at least to me. And I'm going to have so much Khabib that it's going to be hard to get to Maverick anyway. All right, so we'll move on to the first fight of the night, which is a fight taking place in the lightweight division between Joel Alvarez and Alexander Yakovlev. We'll start off with Joel Alvarez, who at this point I got to consider him my boy, because 3 months ago he had a fight against Joe Duffy, and he was one of the biggest underdogs on the card, and I loved him. I had a ton of exposure, and I had a great night because of him. Won a lot of money when he pulled off that submission and guillotine choked Joe Duffy. And he's been pretty good now in the UFC, right? He's 2-1. He's got 2 victories. They were both finishes. And then that one loss to Damir Ismagulov, which, I mean, what a tough opponent to take in your UFC debut. So 17-2 record, and he's just big for the division, man. He's 6'3", with a 77-inch reach at 156 pounds. That's crazy. He's taken on Alexander Yakovlev, UFC veteran at this point, who hasn't been the most active fighter in the UFC. And at this point, to me, he's just a guy. Like, he's 2-3 in his 5 most recent fights. His victories, you have to go all the way back to 5 years ago when he finished George Sullivan. He's no longer in the UFC. And then he subbed with a guillotine choke Alex Da Silva about 1.5 years ago. But this is a guy that's been subbed by Zach Cummings. He did lose the Kamaru Usman, super tough fight. And he also lost his most recent fight to Roosevelt Roberts. I don't like Yakovlev here. I know he's the more experienced fighter. This is a guy that's fought Damian Maia, Gray Maynard, Kamaru Usman, as I mentioned, Paul Daly. He's been in the ring with a lot of guys, but he's durable. He's tough. He's not elite in any one area, and I just think Joel Alvarez having that size advantage. Yakovlev's a pretty big guy too. I mean, I think he's like 6'2", but he's not going to have the same reach as Alvarez. Alvarez is just a broader, just a bigger guy. And if Alvarez can get this to the ground, it's possible that he can sub Yakovlev here. That's what I would expect. If you look at the odds, Alvarez opened up as a big favorite at minus 200. He's all the way down at minus 160. The public are obviously seeing something in Yakovlev that I'm not seeing. I think Yakovlev's on his way out. I think Joel Alvarez is an up-and-comer. It's the first fight of the night. It's not something I typically would bet on, but if I am going to bet on this one, it will be on Alvarez. When it comes to DraftKings, it's hard for me to get to a ton of either of these guys. I might have a little bit of Alvarez. Probably will not have any Yakovlev, who's very similar to Sam Alvey. He's really never been a good fantasy performer. He's got one victory all the way back in 2016 against Sullivan, that early KO where he put up 127 points. But other than that, you haven't got a ton out of Yakovlev. Alvarez priced up at 9K. Those odds do not suggest that he should be priced all the way up at 9K. That does scare me a little bit. So I'm not going to have a ton of him, but he's a decent pivot play. I would probably have more Alvarez than I would have Maverick, I'll tell you that. So, all right, let's move on to the money-making segment where I provide you guys with a lineup here that you guys can all play and hopefully win some money off of. I had 2 that I kind of went back and forth on presenting to you, but I've narrowed it down to this one. We're going to go with Khabib Nurmagomedov at 9,200, Magomed Ankalaev at 8,900, Alexander Volkov at 8,600. Tai Tuivasa at 7,900. Rachmanov at 7,700. And Nathaniel Wood at 7,500. So this is an interesting one because, as you can see, I stayed away from the Cannonier Whitaker co-main event. If I had the capital, I would love to be able to sub out Tai Tuivasa and sub in Cannonier, but I just don't have the capital. I'm up against it. I don't have the remaining salary. So that is the lineup that you guys can certainly play. And good luck this weekend. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for subscribing. I really appreciate it. And every week, man, every week I'm here to try to help you guys win some money. So good luck this weekend.